Welcome back to the One Soccer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Ray. Today's guest is Andrew Swanson, president and general manager of Edgewater Castle FC, a community-driven soccer club based in North Chicago. Andrew is leading a project that blends grassroots engagement, sustainable club operations, and long-term professional ambitions. Under his leadership, the club has grown into one of the most compelling community-based soccer projects in the Chicago region. In this conversation, we'll explore the economics of building a club from the ground up, the evolving soccer landscape in Chicago, and what it actually takes to transition from a community club into a professional organization. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you doing?
Great. I'm great. Thank you so much for that very detailed introduction. I will need to take that for my own blurb purposes later on. But yeah, I'm really honored to be here. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. To dive right into it, I want to ask you my favorite question. How did you get involved in the beautiful game?
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted story, honestly, but I was basically a person who was very jealous my whole life of the fact that my brother and sister were born in Scotland, and I was not. So that was sort of potentially the seed of all this at the very beginning. But I didn't really get into soccer in the way that I am now until my late 20s. So it was a pretty random first encounter, but I had experienced an injury as a carpenter, which I won't get into. But I was essentially had to be off my feet and on the couch for a while, and in that time, I had just randomly put a Champions League game on TV. It turned out it was Champions League. I found that out after I'd been watching for about 20 minutes, just kind of like befuddled and puzzled as to why I was, becoming more and more interested as the ball was moving around. And yeah, I've always been a person who's really a bit of a sponge and wants to sort of dig into the history of things more and more. And as soon as I sort of did enough research to discover this was a team from one country playing a team from another country, but not international soccer, club soccer, I was like, okay, what's going on here? So I just dug into it a lot more deeply. And yeah, within a couple months of that moment, I was devising a plan to start a club in my neighborhood. So the bug caught very quickly for me. And yeah, I've been in full on obsession mode ever since. So that was in 2016 that this all took place. So I've only really been into the game to this degree for about a decade now, but feels like a lot longer than that, admittedly.
For sure. You mentioned that bug. I mean, what about it, about soccer, or as they call in Scotland, football? What about it caught your attention and made you stick this long and build something of your own?
I mean, I couldn't really tell you at first, honestly. I was sort of as surprised as anyone that I had become so interested in it. I think that, aside from just the mechanics of the game and the scale of it and the way the ball moves on a really long cross, like there are things about it that you sort of don't experience in other sports as much, just from a viewing perspective. But the more I learned about it and the more I sort of discovered how kind of globally important the game is to people culturally in other parts of the world, primarily, right? Not as much here in the U.S. That just really struck me, and I sort of started to do more research into the history of the game and sort of how it moved around the world and touched different cultures in different parts of the globe and like every continent over the last 100 and some odd years, 150 years or so. I just found it super fascinating because I love things that are able to um, kind of be their own way for cultures to interact with each other. And I think there are really no better mediums for that than soccer. And I live in a very like geographically small but incredibly globally diverse community in Chicago, in Edgewater and Rogers Park and Uptown Albany Park. These areas of Chicago are immensely diverse with like 80 languages spoken in each of them and folks from all over the world. So a lot of those things kind of aligned with why I caught the bug so quickly, because I sort of just realized that if you get obsessed with it, there is no bottom to the well of information about soccer in the world and its history, so you can learn forever. You're like, I'm never going to stop learning things about the game, which I really love. And yeah, also just the community that I already was very committed to and really enjoyed being a part of felt like one that would also really appreciate a club of its own. So those things all kind of just intersected together around that same time.
Understood. When did you start Edgewater Castle FC?
We started the club officially in 2017. So we got our nonprofit status in November. We were incorporated on Halloween of 2017. So we sort of spent our first fiscal year, our first year with, games and a team in 2018. Um, so yeah, it was a pretty quick turnaround between actually having the idea and getting the paperwork done and sort of starting off on the process of that, which at the time was just a nonprofit community club exclusively at that point. So yeah, the sort of origin of that is I had a friend already in the community who I knew through various things. And I knew that he had been running youth soccer clinics essentially for the local elementary school nearby the storefront theater that I was running at the time, all sort of in the same community in Edgewater. And when I had the idea, the local alderman told me that I had to go speak with James Katia, who he knows is a big soccer guy from Tanzania originally. And as soon as I met James, we hit it off very quickly. And, the idea came up of starting a club in the neighborhood. And he's just been like as down as anyone could possibly be from the very beginning of that conversation. Yeah, it quickly just sort of evolved from there. And we had that conversation, I think, at the end of 2016, maybe. And then, yeah, spent the next year kind of devising things and getting things ready and creating a logo and doing all the red tape and paperwork. So yeah, it was a quick situation in 2017 that kind of got things moving and got us starting to actually kick a ball around.
Yeah, very quick turnaround from 2017 to 2018, 1 year. What league did you guys choose to go into and why?
Yeah, so our first ever league, I believe, was an indoor league called the Europa Soccer League in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Um, we chose to join that league because it was essentially, as far as we knew, the only one in the geographic area that we could reasonably expect our players to get to or be able to get players to ourselves and afford to join. A lot of it was just based on um, for us and everyone else about accessibility and how easy it was to get to places, how much it cost to do, things like that. So we joined the Europa League in the indoor season. And then that first outdoor season, we joined Premier Soccer League of Chicagoland, which is sort of a local city amateur league, and spent a year or two there in 2018, 2019. And then in 2020, we'd sort of grown to the point that we wanted to take on a sort of more regional competition, and we were competing in the state cup pretty regularly. And we in 2020 joined Midwest Premier League, which was going to sort of start that year. That did not happen for obvious reasons. But that was the pandemic year was sort of a obvious challenge for everyone, and getting through that. For us being such a young company already and such a young organization, we had to figure out how to pivot and make the year worthwhile. And we came back way stronger from that in 2021, which was our first season in Midwest Premier League, which was also its first season.
Very nice. And then you guys are currently in USL2 and USLW league.
That's correct. Yeah. So we joined USL2 and USLW this past off season. So going into 2026 for our first season there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, why did you choose to enter both those leagues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, the women's program, which we started in 2022, has been just a enormous success for us, and like on the field, off the field, just in terms of sort of the culture of the club as a whole. It's super important to us. And one thing that's always been sort of at the top of mind for me is that we want to put equal effort and energy into our women's program and our men's program. So at this moment, our women are coming off a national championship in UWS and won the Illinois State Cup, and just played incredibly well last year. And our men also performed really, really well, won the state cup, won promotion in Midwest Premier League last year. So both teams sort of exhibited at the same time that they have what it takes to move up. It's a challenge, certainly more so more so than anything, just the scale of both those leagues compared to the ones we were in are different and bigger. So it is a challenge for us. But ever since starting the women's team, they've just sort of been this shining example of what we want to be as a club. So it was always going to be the case that we would make that move together with the men's and women's program, because we have, genuinely similar ambitions for both sides of the club. Like our women's program, we very much want to see grow and continue to get bigger and better. And eventually, I think the women's pro landscape in the US will continue to evolve, and the right place for the club will be hopefully there at some point in the pros. That maybe not in the first division at first, but we have a organic pathway toward that we want to see both sides of the club take.
Absolutely. With your experience operating in different leagues, how has it been operating in the USL ecosystem now?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely very organized. Not to say anything about UWS or Midwest Premier League not being organized, but I was really, really impressed by just the scale and scope of that staff. Down in Florida, and how committed they are. At this level, I think that it's been really, really great for us to essentially just have to see where we're at in comparison to those leagues, and where their operations are out and what their expectations are. So yeah, it's been great. I think, we don't really like to commit to things that we can't pull off, right? So we've always wanted to make sure that we felt very confident that we are prepared for the move up to USL2 and USLW. And yeah, we do feel like we've we've gotten ourselves in a position where we feel pretty confident being in those spaces, and meeting those expectations. But yeah, I think the scale of it is pretty impressive. When you think about how many teams and regions of the country and how big the country is, and so on and so forth. And from the USL2 final last year, for example, with Vermont against Ballard, like those teams are really far apart. So that is a genuine national competition. So I think that's something that's really, really exciting. But yeah, it's been great. Honestly, I think there's the U.S. soccer landscape and ecosystem is imperfect in many ways. I think everyone would admit that, but I think it's just such an important rung on the ladder of soccer here, both for players and people who want to work in the game in other areas. It's yeah, it's despite not being quite professional, it feels very small p professional.
Yeah, for
So yeah,
sure.
I really enjoyed it.
Definitely. I think that northeast, markets, teams in that market are having success. Rhode Island, Hartford Athletic. You hear a lot about Portland, Maine, which you got that scarf in the back, and I got that jersey right there.
Yeah, I know. I was saying we're a very subtle advertisement for Hearts of Pine right now. It's great.
You mentioned Vermont Green operating in USL2, and they're that club killing it, and selling out 4,500 seats around there. Don't quote me on that, guys. They just won the season last year. Who else do you have Northeast?
Yeah, they've got they've got a bunch of teams up there. I believe Christos FC is in Baltimore area. Um yeah, I mean, the whole country just has there's a really, really good team in every area. So that's something that I find really impressive, is that, the Northeast here in the Midwest, the Northwest, as we said, with like Ballard and all the clubs that are up there. It's exciting to see, because again, I think the more stable the foundations of the environment are, the better. And that sort of starts with whatever that first access to elite soccer is. And I think that yeah, the USL is doing a pretty good job making that kind of lowest rung um still pretty high. So I think that's positive.
100%. I think even just the growth, the excitement behind soccer, where soccer is, from what it happened last year, from the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup to this year. We're just a few months out. We're in April 1st now, right? May June, right? So just 2 more months. We're 2 more months away from the 2026 World Cup. the biggest event in the world that only happens every 4 years. This year, it's going to have a different format. 3 countries hosting at one time: Canada, US, Mexico. More teams, 48 teams. And then 2028, you got the LA Olympics, more soccer being played in the US, and then potentially a 2031 Women's World Cup. So the runway for soccer is super exciting in the US market. How do you see what's coming up next, the World Cup, affecting your club?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everyone's asking themselves that question, right? I think in the US right now, it's a sort of battle for attention in the midst of it, right? I think in Chicago, we're in kind of a unique position because we're one of the biggest markets that doesn't have a game. Um, Rahm Emanuel's choice. Wasn't even a soccer fan at that point, really. But basically, we ended up without one, and we do have a really exciting send off game at Soldier Field for the U.S., who's playing Germany. So that's great. I think that's a very very nice consolation for the city. But with the excitement around something as big as the World Cup, it's going to have a huge impact on any global city, right? And Chicago is a global city, so I think you will be feeling and seeing the energy of the World Cup all over town and in pubs and parks and watch parties, and people are going to be taking it in to a really extreme degree. To answer your question, I think that the best way a club like us and other, community clubs around the US can take advantage of it is just using that excitement and attention to help introduce people to you. I think that one of the issues with getting attention for soccer clubs in the US is the competition with the other big sports, right? And the fact that it's very rare in the US at least to have a soccer entity that is really competing with any of those other, bigger sports classically here, like football and baseball, basketball, hockey, a little bit, not as much anymore. Um, but when the World Cup is here, nothing's really bigger than that. Nothing can really compete with the World Cup, frankly. So that's super super exciting for people that are working in soccer because it means that the percentage of the general population whose attention and eyes are on the game just increases dramatically for a month. The other thing that I think is unique about clubs like us and our level is that while the first divisions are taking the summer off, we're not. So in Chicago specifically, we don't have a USL championship or USL League One team. And the Fire and the Red Stars or the Stars rather, forgive me, of MLS and NWSL are taking the time of the World Cup off from playing for obvious reasons. But we're not. So we're going to be one of the only games in town, literally, throughout that entire period of time when a lot of attention is going to be paid on the game of soccer and also on the sort of culture of soccer globally, which I think is something that is different from sports here, typically speaking. And something that I think we, as a club in a really global community that really celebrates that, um, are able to, make known as a part of our identity as well. So at least I hope so. That's our plan anyway, is to do our best to get a lot of people out to our games. We've scheduled a lot of our games with the knowledge that there are big World Cup games happening that evening. So a lot of our kickoffs are noon or 1 p.m. so that folks can get out and make sure that they catch all those games. Um, and yeah, I think the best thing that we can do is kind of try to harmonize with whatever positivity comes to the game in general in this country. And then, a market like Chicago that's as big as it is, yeah, we just gotta do our best to gain whatever percentage of those eyes we can.
100%. Edgewater Castle FC has positioned itself as a deeply community driven club in North Chicago. From your perspective, what does a true community club actually look like in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, my opinion on this hasn't changed too dramatically, but it has changed a bit. I think um, one thing that I think really stands out is having, having a pretty clear set of values and a pretty clear identity. And I think what's important also, I don't think you have to be a really small club to be a community club. I think there are massive clubs that are, defined as community clubs also. But I do think that there are a few questions that, when answered, help describe that to me. Mostly like, who is it for? You know, who is your club designed to serve, and what is the sort of demographic of the audience you're going after? How far away do you operate your organization from the community you serve? How easy is it to access the thing you do and your product, so to speak? And also, is the identity of the community you're in taking taken into account sort of on a regular basis as you go about your business, because I think that, one thing that's sort of very common is clubs that I think have very experienced staff and really good business plans and good branding and all these things, are sort of starting from scratch when it comes to learning your area and learning the people in it and learning what, those communities are looking for in a soccer club. So yeah, I think a big part of it is sort of just having the patience to put in the time to get to know who your fans will be, and knowing that what you're doing is meant to make it easier for them to enjoy it, not easier for you to do it. um yeah, I guess that's like the easiest way I can put that without, breaking into a poem or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's my best answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, spending that time to get to know the fan, understand the fan, and provide what they want is extremely important. We're definitely in the people's business for sure.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
One of the interesting aspects of your model is that you've built sustainability through partnership with schools, park districts, and community programming, rather than relying on expensive infrastructure projects. How did that model strategy come together?
Yeah, so that has a little bit to do with part of the origin story that I skipped, which is that my background prior to getting into soccer was in theater, and as a producer and an actor and playwright and set designer, and basically everything you can learn in a theater I did at some point. But a big part of my time running a theater that I founded in college called Jackalope Theater Company was the community engagement department of the company. So I spent many years just literally getting to know my neighborhood better, and getting to know who ran the local schools and who the older people were in the communities. What are the big other nonprofits and organizations that are really providing for people the most here. And also that gave me a very sincere crash course in working with civic organizations like the Chicago Public Schools and Chicago Park District. Um, and you're right that those things really have dramatically impacted the way we've designed and built Edgewater Castle Football Club, because we've always known that the biggest challenge in many cases in trying to do something like run a soccer club is the expense, and primarily the expense of space. And that in a city like Chicago, a space the size of a soccer field, period, let alone one covered in grass or turf that's decent enough to play on, is pretty rare. So the cost of that in a area this dense is very high. So with a lot of the sort of civic engagement stuff that I was learning through operating the theater company, shout out Jackalope Theater Company, also in Edgewater. But what I learned from that was really about understanding what resources there are, understanding who owns and controls them, and understanding what they cost, both in terms of what you would pay for them and also what things you can do instead of pay for them to get access to them, right? And so, in that regard, I mean that we devised partnerships with the Park District, in which we give, over 2,500 kids every year free access to soccer after school during the summer, indoor and outdoor year round. And through those programs, we are given access to park owned field space to train with for our first teams. And that sort of nonprofit founding and nonprofit relationship that we have between that youth work and that outdoor later at night field space has been one of the more, sustainable aspects of our club, is that through fulfilling our own mission of providing free access to the game of soccer for the local youth in our neighborhood, we're also able to give free access to adult soccer for our first team players using the same civic organization's properties. And that to me is just like a win-win of being able to create that access on both ends, and us being able to build a model that we can grow with really sustainably. And that's been a huge blessing, and I admit that not a lot of people have the patience to put, um, what's now 16, 17 years of a relationship toward things like this. But that's sort of what community is. It's just being a part of it long enough that you really know how to operate within it.
Exactly. I think, one of my big takeaways here is again, I mentioned before, but I'll say it again, time. And that you actually took the time to figure out who's who, understand who they are, what they do, and what kind of relationship could be there. So very key. And that's something actually very important to me as well, for building out OSN. We spent a lot of time providing value and strategic media exposure, but as well as building that human relationship first and seeing how we could, who's who, providing value and providing exposure through distribution. So, that's definitely important. It's key to building a project like yours and to mine. Um, with saying that, Chicago is already home to MLS, a large youth ecosystem, and a diverse soccer culture. From your perspective inside the market, how would you describe the current soccer landscape in Chicago?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really does feel like it's changing all the time. When we started the club in 2017, that was, I believe, up until recently, the Fire's last like really positive, like they made the postseason. It was Basti's first year. Um, and I think that the Chicago soccer culture has been pretty dominated by MLS and NWSL through the Stars and through the Fire. And then through the sort of amateur, um, honestly more like culturally, ethnically based clubs and institutions that have been around for a really long time. So, soccer's foothold in Chicago culture has kind of relied exclusively on like the top of the pyramid and the foundation of the pyramid. And that, every city in America, sort of its original clubs were made up of immigrants from one country or another, and still to this day, many of the most renowned and top clubs in amateur soccer in the US are those clubs, here in Chicago, RWB Adria, Milwaukee's Bavarians, and, there are just dozens and dozens of clubs like that here in Chicago. I think that what we've seen since we started the club, what we've seen change in the general environment here is that there have been many more sort of new amateur local community brands come up through some of the new leagues that have emerged, like the Midwest Premier League, and there's a new GCSL league in Chicago, which is just the city division, which is not taking place in the suburbs, but actually in the city. Um, and I think that, the environment has really grown over the last several years through supporter culture and through pickup soccer and the sort of various pickup soccer scenes around Chicago. There's sort of a new like art and design and fashion element to the soccer culture here through a number of different creators. And, there's a lot of online presence of all these institutions here in Chicago now. And it is coupled with the fact that the Stars and the Fire are starting to do some things well. I think that with the Fire moving back into the city, doing a double rebrand, no one wants a double rebrand, but they got it right, and they made that decision, the decision to eventually move out of Bridgeview. All of these things sort of stack up to help support a healthy soccer culture. I think that um, the big moment on the horizon for us here in Chicago is the Fire building their new stadium in the 78, which will be the 78th neighborhood in Chicago. right along the South Branch of the river. And that's going to be incredible. And it'll be a huge moment for the city. But it will still also be just the tip of the pyramid, you know? So I think ultimately Chicago's soccer culture is sort of only as big as the rungs on the ladder between what's always been here and what the Fire is doing, you know? So I think that there's room in a city this large for more things to exist between those two. And I think over the last 5 years, a lot of positive things have happened to make it feel like sort of a richer and more populated culture here in Chicago lately.
Very nice. In global soccer, often we see underdog clubs with strong community backing grow into powerful stories. You mentioned that Edgewater Castle feels like it's on that kind of trajectory. What makes this club story very unique?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we hate to be too bold and toot our horns too loudly or anything, but I do think that we have a pretty unique story in the US in that, you know, we started from zero. You know, we started from nothing, but an idea over a cup of coffee 8 years ago. And we've had to really, really work and be patient and learn the hard way a lot of times to get where we are, you know? And I think that there is a sense of grit that kind of comes to uh, or comes with rather the process of growing and getting bigger. And you know, when that process is started from just a seed, um, and is now sort of growing into a larger thing. I think people take notice of that and appreciate that because, at least in my opinion, there's sort of an authenticity to that journey and that story, in which, you know, the hours and the hard work and the effort and the sacrifices are kind of all there to see, and it's pretty obvious to everyone who's been here the whole time how hard we've worked to get here. Um, and I also think that, you know, there's no telling how the eventual promotion and relegation system in the US will change things and affect things. But regardless, I think that um, you know, when people in this country get so drawn in to stories like Wrexham and Ted Lasso and start to learn more about like what a underdog scenario in soccer means and like just how much of an underdog you can be in this game, that I think is really exciting. And I think that because we do have the ambitions we do, um, I think that's unique too. Because I think every day the game, at least on the pro level, is harder and harder to grow your way into. You know, I think the accessibility of pro soccer in the U.S. is it's the you know time is running out for it to even be financially possible for a club like us to get there. But I believe we can do it, and I believe in the fact that we we really authentically know who we are and how we've done what we've done, and we really hold true to our values and, you know, put our money where our mouth is or don't if we can avoid it. And you know, the hope for me is that people, you know, as they learn about us and as they sort of understand our story more, kind of fall in love with that and fall in love with the idea of us being able to succeed and being able to kind of make this climb, um, as a club and kind of as a community also.
Definitely. I think that USL is in an exciting stage of the league. As you mentioned, to the time running out, that's, you know, part of that's due to, you know, Bell Tower's investment at the league level for the first time, and then Weatherford Capital coming in after as well, private equity coming in, investing in at the league level. I think you're seeing some excitement from Pro Rel, you know, the league announcing that pushing for 2028. They'll have three tiers included in that, starting off with USL Premier League, and then USL Championships already there, D2, USL League One is D3 already there. So it's super exciting, and that's how the league is differentiating their product versus MLS, where MLS doesn't have that. It's closed off. And then to your point of you know, investors, American investors, especially investing overseas to Europe and buying their way into owning club ownership in lower tier division clubs at D5, D4, D3, and with the intention of getting that club having that opportunity as well from Pro Rel to getting it promoted to, to Division 1 as the ultimate goal, and what those, what opens up in those leagues, the revenue streams that open up there, can be pretty big. With saying that, coming to the economic side of things, let's talk about the business side. What does the financial model of a community-driven semi-professional club actually look like in practice?
Whew. It's changed basically every year for us. And so we have a hard time answering this question because, we've honestly tried to build on momentum and grow every single year, So, 2021 was the last year that we had just one first team competing, So we had just the men's team competing in Midwest Premier League. And then the following year we added the women's program. Then the following year, we sort of moved that women's program into UWS. So every year, our budget needed to grow to demand that growth. Again, we've done things really, really sustainably, partially because it's just the smart thing to do, and the responsible thing to do, but also because we don't charge players to play ever. So any program we've ever done has been free to participate in for players, youth, adult, parents, everybody. No one's paying us to do it. Which is, I'm sure like especially in the youth model and in a lot of the adult, amateur, and semi-pro model too, that isn't always the case. I think it's more common now for more elite adult sides to not necessarily charge younger players to play, but a lot of them do still. So that for us is a financial reality that means we have to really rely on other, frankly, more professional avenues of revenue, which is sponsorship, ticket sales, any kind of sort of advertising dollars we can get through, like you mentioned, podcast sponsorship, any kind of sort of unique merch things that we can come up with to sell merch. We do all that stuff, So the highest demand on us is really through sponsorship. And that's, even before, which I haven't mentioned yet, but even before we sort of made the split from the nonprofit into an LLC, that was still always the case for us. So 2025 was our first year launching our LLC and starting to bring in some new ownership and investment into the club to help us make this jump to USL2 and USLW this year. But prior to that, we were completely a nonprofit organization that still needed that sponsorship money to support us. So now we've broken those two entities into two sides of the club through the nonprofit and the LLC. And it's still the same case. We absolutely rely on that for the financial side. Obviously in the long term, the LLC is now also getting more ownership and investors on board, which changes sort of the budget and the financial model. However, the reality is that in not too long, we'll be making that new target significantly higher in order to try to make the jump to USL League One, like you mentioned, at the sort of bottom of that professional pyramid for USL, and that number is just dramatically larger for obvious reasons. So what we're doing this year is essentially, in my mind, operating at a pretty high USL2, USLW level as a club, as a single club operating both of those teams. And we're doing our best with those same means of revenue, which is, like I said, sponsorship, a ton of smaller community sponsors, and then obviously the bigger items like front of kit, back of kit, stadium sponsors, things like that are the ones that really do the heavy lifting, throughout the season.
Understood, Andrew. Just a few millions, only a few millions to enter that USL, to
Just
get
a
that
few.
USL1
I mean, a
franchise.
handful, two handfuls.
With saying that, when you think about the transition, what are the biggest structural hurdles your club needs to overcome?
Yeah. Do you mean the transition into USL1 at some point, or the
Yeah.
transition this year? Yeah, into USL1. I think The budgetary differences are many. The size of a USL League One budget is just astronomically larger, mostly because everyone's getting paid a decent wage, right, quote unquote. um our hope is basically that we, like I said, are able to operate at a pretty high level in USL2 this year budgetarily. But the acknowledgement of the way uh the finances need to look to have a squad that's good enough to compete, to have coaching staff that's paid well enough to do their jobs, and have ticket sales and marketing and all the things that we currently rely on, like these very talented and amazing people who are not making very much money at all doing it. We need all those same departments to really put in pro effort to keep that momentum going, and that just takes a bigger budget. The size of the stadium, the things that stadium needs to have in it. All of that stuff. So every aspect of the organization has to go through another series of pretty extreme growing pains to get to the point where we're operating fully at that level. I know that, there's clubs that have gone from USL2 to USL League One and been successful, but I also know that process um, can be tough. It's like a really really different ball game in a lot of ways, and I think I've gotten a lot of great advice from folks who've gone through the experience or similar experiences, just about um, what pitfalls to avoid and what things to make sure you're not assuming about pro soccer compared to League One or League Two. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things will need to change. Obviously, for us, one of the biggest hurdles is going to be where our home is. In Chicago, like I said, it's a very dense place. There are some really excellent options for us in our region of the city up here, both this coming summer at Winamax Stadium, and beyond that. I think you have to kind of take in every potential pathway and variable, and try to see what fits best for the future. But yeah, I think that we're always really excited by the prospect of being able to take on those challenges and those things that are um, more difficult than we've experienced so far. But we've been pretty decent at meeting them where they're at so far. So yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess.
Definitely. So, Andrew, you've mentioned the LLC that you guys have structured to bring in additional investors. With saying that, as you guys push towards League One, are you guys looking for more investors to help make that big jump?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have spent all of 2025 essentially closing out what is now the vast majority of our B series. And that the purpose of that group and that sort of initial investment has been to make the move into USL2 and W, sort of begin planning the ramp or trampoline or trebuchet or whatever imagery you want to use to describe that next phase of launching us up to League One. We are definitely going to be, needing significantly more investment in order to make that jump to League One. So we are expecting some of the folks who are already involved in our B series, our seed round, to participate in that next fundraise also in the A series. And that's a significantly larger sum that we're aiming for. So we will most likely be bringing in additional ownership in at pretty significant percentages there for the A series and the fundraise toward League One. Yeah.
Understood. And my last question is, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what does success look like for Edgewater Castle FC?
I think about it all the time. In 5 to 10 years, I think we are operating both the men's and women's professional club here in the far north side of Chicago. I think that by that time, we have won a couple of trophies in the professional ranks, ideally either through promotion or winning a championship or two. I would say that one thing that I would love to have happen by that time is that we have hosted and defeated the Chicago Fire at home in a U.S. Open Cup match. That would be a huge milestone at some point that we dream about quite often. And I'd also say that we have at that point, really long established home stadium in our area and in our community that people can access easily, that people love, and that we are able to put on as good a show as we want to put on. That's obviously a huge component to any pro soccer club's life is its relationship to the stadium and where it is. So that's something that we're really, really focused on now and creating the right pathway forward for. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is just that we're in 5 to 10 years, very obviously, the only men's and women's pro club in Chicago.
Yeah, well, definitely looking forward to watching your club continue to grow and staying connected to you and hearing the stories, the updates, and what's going on your side. And before we close off, I do have some fun rapid fire questions. I'll give you two options. Either you could answer it in just one word or like a super short, quick answer. These are
Okay.
rapid fire questions. So starting off with the first one city that has built a soccer club the right way.
Yeah, it's hard not to say Burlington, Vermont. The Vermont Green has just done such a good job. So yeah, that's my answer. Vermont Green, Vermont.
Most underrated factor in building a successful soccer club.
I think patience.
One,
Patience.
yeah, that's a good one. One lesson you've learned about sports ownership.
It takes a village.
That's a good one too. A soccer club whose culture you admire. I think I know that one, but
Well, no, I'm actually gonna say one here in the U.S. I'm gonna say Oakland Roots. I think,
okay.
yeah, I think they've done a really excellent job with that. I mean, the obvious answer for me is also, I mean, I can name a ton of them, Barcelona. There's also, I mean, I really admire St. Pauli, what St. Pauli does in a lot of ways. There's a lot of really incredible clubs, but I'll say what Oakland Roots has done, and Oakland Roots represents their culture and the Bay Area really, really well.
G- Give me two more in the US. Two more clubs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious one, and it's still new, but I think all the boxes are checked so far, is our friends, at Portland Hearts of Pine. I think it's hard
Yeah,
not to
I thought
include
you were
them.
gonna say it.
Yeah, it was a little too on the nose, but it's true. They're so obviously doing things so right. So yeah, I think Portland, Maine, got to be up there.
And then one more.
And then one more. Let's see. I'm it's impossible not to get drawn toward the Northeast lately, so I'm trying to go somewhere else. Um, this is a weird one, but if you look at the history of Nashville SC has actually a pretty fascinating and organic story that started not too dissimilarly from us. And that Nashville SC was kind of a local, started by a group of friends club before it became a USL team and then became a MLS team. So I think that MLS franchise has a lot more kind of like roots to it, not to reference Oakland again, but does have a lot more roots in its community than I think people give it credit for. So I'll say that.
For sure. I think that kind of reminds me of Detroit City FC, how they've been able to move up the ladder. And then I know Court Jetski was played a part in Nashville. Yeah, I mean, there's so many clubs. And the
There
last
are.
question I have, yeah, there's too many. If Edgewater Castle reaches USL League One, what will that moment mean to you?
Yeah, a ton. I mean, I think in reference to the answer I gave about, it takes a village, I think it would mean the most to me because of ideally the fact that it means a lot to everyone else that's involved in this. I think, we've worked really, really hard to get to the point where that consideration isn't kind of absurd. So for us, even being able to be in the conversation about that happening is thrilling for us. So I think what it would mean to the whole club and to James and I, my co-founder James, is, it would be incredible. It would be really, really incredible for us to be able to say that we grew this thing from an idea over a cup of coffee into the next pro team and one of the biggest markets in the US. That would mean a lot.
That's how it goes. I remember going out to Tampa to the headquarters USL HQ and going for lunch with one of the league representatives and just writing on paper what OSN is, what we're working on building. So that's how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah,
Cup of
yeah,
coffee.
yeah, of course. Absolutely. Cups of coffee go a long way in starting things.
Exactly. And there's actually a saying, I don't remember it exactly, but it kind of goes like business is built on a cup of coffee a day or something like that.
Yeah,
Something
yeah,
along that
yeah,
line.
yeah. Something like that. That makes sense. I'm unfortunately drinking way more than one cup of coffee a day, so I'm just getting a lot of business done, I guess.
Yeah. So, with saying that, Andrew, thank you for sharing the story behind Edgewater Castle FC and the work you're doing in Chicago. And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and follow the One Soccer Nation podcast for more insights from the operators, investors, and builders shaping the future of the global soccer ecosystem.